Mitchell grew up in a home that appeared calm from the outside, but was filled with unspoken rules within. From an early age, she understood that affection often came with judgment. Her parents believed life had to follow a clear and safe path. Education, career, and reputation were the main measures. Anything that did not align with those standards was seen as a wrong turn. Mitchell learned to adjust herself, not out of fear, but from a desire to be accepted. Her father rarely spoke at length. Each sentence was brief and direct. He judged people by results that could be explained quickly. Her mother spoke more often, but her words frequently ended in comparisons. Other people's children, neighbors, or relatives were always used as examples. For Mitchell, home was not a place to ask questions, but a place to comply. She grew into a child who was neat, orderly, and careful in how she behaved. At school, Mitchell never caused trouble. She studied well, completed assignments on time, and rarely drew attention to herself. However, her interests did not always match her family's expectations. She was drawn to how the real world worked, to the process of building something from the ground up, and to choices that allowed room to grow. She never spoke about these interests with enthusiasm. She knew what kind of response would follow and chose to keep them to herself. As she entered adulthood, the pressure became more tangible. Questions about her future came more often. Every family gathering ended with the same topic. Mitchell was asked to explain her life plans in detail. She answered honestly, but briefly. She was not ready to face the disappointment that was clearly visible on her parents' faces. She chose to keep the atmosphere calm, even if it meant suppressing her own desires. A major decision came after long consideration. Mitchell chose a path that was unpopular in her family. The choice was not an act of rebellion, but one of awareness. She wanted to live a life she could fully take responsibility for. The decision was not met with arguments. There were no raised voices or slammed doors. Instead, there was a subtle but noticeable shift in attitude. From that point on, communication became infrequent. Text messages were answered only when necessary. Phone calls often ended quickly. Questions about her daily life sounded formal, like brief reports. Mitchell felt the distance growing wider. She was not pushed away, but she was not embraced either. She existed, yet she was no longer truly included. Mitchell tried to understand without placing blame. She knew her parents were shaped by their own experiences. She understood their fear of failure and of public judgment. Still, that understanding did not erase her exhaustion. Each time she returned home, she felt she had to justify her existence. Every story about her work felt like a defense, not a moment of sharing. Outside the family home, Mitchell began building her life with discipline. She worked hard, learned from mistakes, and improved the way she operated. There were no shortcuts. Her days were filled with routines that demanded focus. She did not tell her family about the process. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because she did not want to hear doubt. Along the way, Mitchell met someone who gave her a sense of safety. Their relationship grew from simple conversations and mutual respect. There was no pressure to become someone else. There was no judgment based on status. Mitchell felt heard and valued. That support gave her a strength she had never experienced before. The decision to marry came after both of them felt ready. Mitchell considered the step carefully. She wanted to build a home filled with openness and trust. When the invitations were prepared, she hesitated. She knew her parents' response might not be what she hoped for. Still, she sent the invitation politely and clearly. Days passed without a reply. There were no messages and no phone calls. Mitchell waited calmly, then stopped waiting. She chose to focus on the preparations ahead of her. She did not want her important day to be colored by lingering disappointment. She learned to accept that not everyone is able to show up, even when they should. As the wedding day approached, Mitchell reorganized her thoughts. She was not seeking recognition. She simply wanted to live the life she had chosen. She understood that this journey was only beginning. She also accepted that distance from her parents was not the end of everything, but it could not be forced either. After deciding on the direction of her life, Mitchell began to truly feel the consequences. Not through open rejection, but through small changes that repeated over time. Calls from home became less frequent. When she reached out first, conversations ended quickly. There were no follow-up questions or interest in details. Everything felt brief and flat, like an obligation fulfilled without emotion. Mitchell tried to act as usual. She still came home when she had the chance, sat at the same dining table, and listened to the same familiar stories. However, the atmosphere was no longer warm. She felt like a guest who had to watch her behavior. Whenever the topic of her work came up, her parents' tone shifted. There was no anger, but there was no support either. Comments often stopped halfway, as if they did not want to go any further. The life choices Mitchell made were seen as unsafe. She did not follow the path that had already been prepared. She did not pursue positions that were easy to explain to others. To her parents, life needed a plan that was clearly visible. Meanwhile, Mitchell chose a long process filled with uncertainty. That difference in perspective created a distance that was not easy to bridge. At work, Mitchell started from the bottom. There were no special positions and no extra privileges. She learned to understand a fast-paced environment with high demands. Mistakes became part of her daily routine. She accepted them without complaint. Every failure taught her something new. She noted what needed to be improved and moved forward more carefully. Her days were filled with a demanding routine. Mornings began early and often ended late. Mitchell rarely had free time. She chose to focus on what she was building. When exhaustion set in, she reminded herself why she had chosen this path in the first place. Not to prove anything to others, but to prove to herself that she could take responsibility for her choices. Amid the busyness, Mitchell realized something important. She no longer shared her experiences with her parents. Not out of fear, but to avoid disappointment. She learned to keep her achievements to herself. When something good happened, she celebrated it quietly. When she failed, she faced it without seeking validation. Her relationship with her family slowly became formal. Text messages carried only basic updates. Congratulations arrived late and without further questions. Mitchell no longer expected much. She adjusted to that reality. She stopped waiting for understanding that might never come. Outside the family circle, Mitchell began building her own network. She met people from diverse backgrounds. Many of them had also chosen unconventional paths. From them, Mitchell learned that success does not always move in a straight line. People fall, rise, and fall again. There are no instant stories. Everything takes time and persistence. Gradually, results began to appear, not in dramatic forms, but enough to build confidence. Her trust in herself grew. She started to understand her work rhythm and found the most effective way to operate. Although not yet fully stable, she felt she was on the right path. Meanwhile, the distance with her parents remained. It did not worsen, but it did not improve either. Whenever Mitchell tried to open deeper conversations, the responses stayed the same, brief and neutral. Eventually, she stopped trying so hard. She realized that not every relationship can be forced to move according to expectations. At some point, Mitchell understood that the freedom she gained came with consequences. She lost the closeness she once assumed was guaranteed. However, she also gained space to grow. She learned to rely on herself and on people who were truly willing to listen. On quiet nights, after long work days, Mitchell often reflected. She asked herself whether she had made the right decision. Each time doubt appeared, she returned to her original reason. She wanted a life that was honest and one she could live without regret. The answer was always the same. As time passed, Mitchell began to understand that the distance between her and her parents was no longer a temporary phase. It turned into a new habit that slowly hardened. She no longer waited for news every weekend. She also stopped feeling guilty when she did not call. The relationship still existed, but without the closeness she had once imagined. At first, Mitchell still tried to maintain the old rhythm. She sent messages to check in, shared updates about her work, and mentioned small details from her daily life. The replies were brief and often delayed. There were no follow-up questions and no curiosity. From there, Mitchell learned to read signals that did not need to be spoken aloud. Each time she returned to her parents' house, the atmosphere felt different. There was no conflict, but there was no warmth either. Conversations stayed safe and shallow. Topics revolved around the weather, distant relatives, or other general matters. When Mitchell tried to talk about her own life, the subject was quickly changed. She would sit, listen, and leave with the same feeling every time. Mitchell realized that her presence had become ordinary. She was no longer part of plans or important discussions. Family decisions were made without her involvement. She often found out after everything was already settled. Not because things were intentionally hidden, but because her presence was no longer considered necessary. This shift left Mitchell emotionally drained. Not out of anger, but from constant adjustment. She learned not to expect too much. She stopped imagining warm conversations that might never happen. She chose to accept reality as it was, even when it felt bitter. At the same time, Mitchell's life kept moving forward. Her work demanded full focus. She faced pressure, deadlines, and growing responsibilities. She learned to manage her time and emotions. No one patted her on the back when she succeeded. No one comforted her when she failed. She stood on her own, and that shaped her into a stronger person. Her relationship with her partner became her only safe space. There, Mitchell could speak without fear of judgment. She could complain without feeling weak. The support was quiet but consistent. From that relationship, Mitchell learned that presence matters more than long advice. Still, inside her, there was an unfinished feeling. She continued to hope that her parents would see her for who she was, not as a list of achievements. That hope appeared from time to time, then faded when it found no place to grow. Mitchell began to realize that holding on to unreturned hope would only hurt her. One day, Mitchell decided to stop explaining her choices. She no longer felt the need to defend her life decisions. She did not want to prove anything. She simply wanted to live her days in peace. That decision brought a relief she had not expected. From that moment on, Mitchell kept her distance in a healthier way. She remained polite and present when necessary, but no longer forced closeness. She stopped measuring herself by her parents' behavior. She began evaluating her life based on what she actually did each day. Slowly, Mitchell built clear boundaries. She learned to say no without guilt. She chose to protect her energy for what truly mattered. She realized that not every relationship needs to be fought for in the same way. Some only need to be maintained enough to prevent further harm. On certain nights, Mitchell still thought about her family. Not with anger, but with a calm distance. She accepted that her parents might never change. She also accepted that she did not need to change in order to be accepted. That understanding came after a great deal of unseen exhaustion. Mitchell's meeting with the person who would later become her partner happened without any grand plan. They met in an ordinary situation, with nothing especially striking about it. The first conversation was simple. There was no effort to impress. No talk of achievements or exaggerated plans for the future. There were just two people listening to each other calmly. At first, Mitchell did not think the relationship would mean much. She was used to keeping emotional distance. Her experiences with her family had made her careful about opening up. However, the next meetings felt different. She did not feel the need to explain herself at length. She was not asked to prove anything. That sense of comfort grew slowly without pressure. Her partner was not someone who liked giving excessive advice. Instead, they asked questions and listened. When Mitchell talked about her work, the response she received was not doubt, but genuine interest. When she shared stories about her family, there were no judgmental comments, only calm acceptance. For Mitchell, this attitude felt new. Their relationship developed alongside each of their busy lives. There was not always a lot of time to meet. Sometimes there were only short conversations between work hours. Still, that consistency created a sense of security. Mitchell began to realize that attention does not need to be grand to feel meaningful. Being present on time and keeping small promises was enough. In this relationship, Mitchell learned to speak more honestly. She started sharing her doubts without feeling weak. She expressed her exhaustion without fearing that she would be seen as incapable. Each time she finished speaking, there were no instant solutions offered. There was only real support. That attitude gave Mitchell space to be herself. Slowly, Mitchell realized that she was beginning to trust this person. Not because of big promises, but because of consistent actions. When Mitchell was busy and hard to reach, her partner did not demand long explanations. When she failed at work, there was no change in attitude. The relationship remained steady even when things were not perfect. That trust led Mitchell to an important realization. She did not need to repeat old patterns. She did not have to chase recognition to feel worthy of love. This relationship was not built on achievements or status. It was built on mutual respect. That understanding made Mitchell feel calmer as she went through her days. Over time, Mitchell began to imagine a future together. Not in the form of big dreams, but realistic plans. They talked about responsibilities, division of roles, and how to handle differences. There were no discussions about pride or other people's judgments. Everything felt realistic and mature. Mitchell hesitated to tell her parents about the relationship. Past experiences had taught her not to expect much. Still, she shared the news briefly. The response was flat and lacked enthusiasm. There were no follow-up questions. Mitchell was not surprised. She had learned to accept that reaction. Instead of feeling disappointed, Mitchell chose to focus on her relationship. She did not want her happiness to depend on approval that might never come. She realized that the support she needed was already close to her. That decision made her more confident in moving forward. This relationship also taught Mitchell about boundaries. She learned that closeness does not mean losing herself. She still had space for her work and her own time. Her partner respected that without feeling threatened. That balance made their relationship feel healthy. At certain moments, Mitchell compared her current relationship with her relationship with her family. The difference was clear. On one side, she always felt she had to meet certain standards. On the other, she was accepted without conditions. That comparison did not bring anger, but a new understanding of what she truly needed. The decision to move the relationship toward marriage was not made hastily. They considered many things carefully. Mitchell wanted to be sure she was not repeating old mistakes. She wanted to build a home that was not filled with judgment. Her partner shared the same view. They agreed that marriage was not about display, but about commitment. The decision to get married brought Mitchell into a phase filled with preparation and careful consideration. She and her partner agreed to hold a simple ceremony. Not because of limitations, but because they wanted to focus on meaning rather than appearance. They planned everything calmly, divided responsibilities clearly, and made sure every detail was realistic. Mitchell felt comfortable with that choice. She did not want her important day to turn into an occasion for judgment. When the guest list was being prepared, Mitchell paused for a long moment at one section. Her parents' names were written neatly, but she hesitated before moving on. It was not because she did not want to invite them, but because she had grown used to disappointment. After careful thought, she decided to send the invitation anyway. She wanted to act with maturity and openness. She did not want to regret not trying. The invitation was prepared carefully. The language was polite and clear. There were no excessive words. Mitchell made sure the address was correct and the time was written accurately. She sent it early so there would be enough time to respond. After that, she waited without applying pressure. She did not call to confirm. She wanted to see what kind of response would come. Days passed without any news. Her message inbox remained empty. There was no sign that the invitation had been received or read. Mitchell tried to calm herself. She told herself that her parents might be busy. She gave them space and time. However, as the weeks went by, that hope slowly faded. Her partner noticed small changes in Mitchell. She became quieter on certain nights. Not gloomy, but clearly deep in thought. When asked, Mitchell answered honestly without drama. She admitted that she was waiting for a response that had not arrived. Her partner did not rush to give advice. They simply stayed present and listened. That attitude helped Mitchell maintain her emotional balance. As the wedding day approached, Mitchell checked her messages and missed calls once again. There was nothing from her parents. She finally accepted that reality calmly. There were no sudden tears, no outbursts of anger. There was only a brief sense of emptiness followed by resolve. Mitchell decided to stop waiting. She focused on the things she could control. She made sure the preparations stayed on track. She chose clothes that felt comfortable. She reviewed the event schedule one last time. She wanted the day to run smoothly, without unnecessary emotional weight. In the midst of the preparations, Mitchell sent a short message to her parents. The content was simple and polite. She shared the date and location once again, without any demands. The message went unanswered. After that, Mitchell did not send anything else. She chose to protect her dignity and her peace of mind. The wedding day grew closer. Mitchell spent her time with people who supported her. Friends helped with small tasks. Her partner's family was warm and welcoming. There were no uncomfortable questions, no judgments about her life choices. Mitchell felt accepted as she was. On the night before the wedding, Mitchell sat alone for a moment. She organized her thoughts. She admitted that part of her still hoped. At the same time, she understood that hope should not control her emotions. She reflected on the path she had taken. She had built her life through hard work and consistency. She did not depend on anyone's approval. The next morning, everything unfolded as planned. There were no disruptions. Mitchell woke up feeling calm. She prepared herself without rushing. When she saw the seats reserved for her parents, her heart felt heavy for a brief moment. She quickly shifted her focus. She did not want that day to be shaped by things she could not change. The ceremony was simple and orderly. Mitchell stood with clear conviction. She felt surrounded by people who truly cared. When the ceremony ended, she did not look around for the faces that were absent. She chose to look toward the future in front of her. After the ceremony, Mitchell received congratulations from many people. There was no message from her parents. She realized that their silence was a choice. She no longer tried to interpret it. She accepted it as it was and moved forward. After the wedding day passed, Mitchell's life did not change dramatically. There were no long celebrations or luxurious honeymoons. She returned to her routine with a steadier sense of self. Marriage gave her a feeling of security, not an escape. She and her partner agreed to continue life as usual, with responsibilities now shared between them. A few days after the ceremony, Mitchell waited for something that never came. There was no congratulations from her parents, no phone call or short message. The silence felt different from before. This time, Mitchell did not try to make excuses. She did not blame herself. She accepted that the relationship had reached a point beyond her control. Mitchell chose not to talk about it too often. She did not want her parents' absence to become the center of her story. She focused on what was in front of her. Her work demanded full attention. New projects arrived with greater responsibility. She saw them as opportunities, not burdens. Mitchell's days were filled with consistent work. She arrived early, completed tasks on time, and learned from every small mistake. She did not wait for praise. She also did not complain when results were not immediately visible. She understood that the process required time and patience. Her partner offered support in simple ways. They shared morning and evening routines. They discussed financial plans openly. There were no conversations about excessive lifestyles. They agreed to live within their means and set aside part of their income for the future. Mitchell felt calmer living a measured and intentional life. At work, trust in Mitchell began to grow. Supervisors and colleagues noticed her consistency. She did not seek attention, but her work spoke for itself. Her responsibilities increased little by little. She learned to manage her time more efficiently and to make decisions with careful consideration. Despite her busy schedule, Mitchell maintained emotional distance from her family. She did not avoid them, but she also did not draw excessively close. She replied to messages when they came, though rarely. She no longer updated them on every step of her life. She stopped expecting recognition to arrive on its own. At one point, Mitchell realized that she no longer felt anxious when thinking about her parents. The sadness was still there, but it no longer dominated her. She began to understand that peace comes when she stops resisting reality. She accepted that not all relationships can unfold as hoped. Outside her main work, Mitchell began developing other skills. She used her free time to learn and broaden her knowledge. She did not share this with many people. For her, learning was a personal investment. She enjoyed the small progress she made without any spotlight. Small, consistent decisions gradually began to show results. Her finances became more stable. She was able to plan her expenses more carefully. She no longer lived from one moment to the next. That sense of security gave her a different kind of confidence, not one that came from others' approval. Mitchell and her partner often discussed long-term goals. They did not set unrealistic targets. They chose practical, achievable steps. Those conversations gave Mitchell a clear sense of direction, something she had once sought from her family. One day, Mitchell received a brief message from her parents. His tone was neutral and emotionless. There was no mention of the wedding. Mitchell read it without an exaggerated reaction. She replied politely. After that, she continued her day as usual. She no longer waited for a change in attitude. Mitchell realized that strength is not always visible from the outside. Sometimes, strength comes in the form of choosing to keep moving forward without applause. She did not feel defeated. She also did not feel victorious. She felt enough. And for Mitchell, that feeling was more valuable than recognition that came too late. The changes in Mitchell's life became more visible, even though she never announced them to anyone. She and her partner continued to live simply. There was no need to display what they had achieved. They chose a life that was orderly, well-planned, and far from the spotlight. For Mitchell, calmness became a new measure of success. Her morning routine remained consistent. Mitchell left for work with clear intentions. She knew what needed to be completed and when to stop. She no longer worked to fill emotional emptiness. She worked because she valued the process and respected the results. This shift in attitude made her work feel more focused. At the office, the responsibilities she carried continued to grow. She was trusted with projects that required accuracy and firmness. Mitchell did not speak much, but she was always prepared with data and reasonable decisions. Colleagues began to see her as someone dependable. That trust did not come suddenly. It grew from small habits she maintained every day. Mitchell's finances also changed in a steady way. She did not alter her lifestyle even as her income increased. She continued to track expenses and restrained herself from unnecessary purchases. Her partner shared the same principles. They discussed priorities and risks openly. Decisions were made together without pressure. Mitchell intentionally kept her distance from social media. She was not interested in sharing achievements or future plans. Not out of fear, but because she did not feel the need. She learned that life feels lighter when it is not constantly compared. She chose to keep her happiness private. Occasionally, Mitchell received invitations to family gatherings. She attended when time allowed. Her attitude remained polite and calm. She did not bring stories about her work. She also did not ask many questions. The meetings were brief and formal. Afterward, she returned to her life without burden. At home, Mitchell and her partner enjoyed simple moments. They cooked together, talked about the day that had passed, and planned weekends without grand agendas. Their relationship was built not on surprises, but on consistency. For Mitchell, that was more than enough. On one occasion, Mitchell received a challenging opportunity. The offer came from a network she had built gradually. She considered it carefully. There was no rushed decision. She evaluated the risks and benefits. After discussing it with her partner, she accepted the offer. The step required greater responsibility, but it also opened space for growth. The new role changed Mitchell's daily rhythm. Her time became tighter. The pressure increased. However, she felt ready. She was already used to managing responsibility without complaint. She set priorities with discipline. When she felt tired, she rested without guilt. Slowly, the results of her hard work became noticeable. Not in the form of public recognition, but in real stability. Mitchell felt more secure facing the future. She was able to support her partner without calculating every move. The confidence that emerged did not come from praise, but from control over her own life. Mitchell's relationship with her parents remained in the same place. It did not worsen, but it did not grow closer either. She no longer expected major changes. She accepted that the distance might always exist. This acceptance brought her peace. She stopped replaying conversations that never happened. One night, Mitchell realized something simple. She no longer felt the need to prove anything. She was not waiting for recognition. She did not hope to be praised. Her life was going well without it. This realization came without euphoria, but it stayed. Mitchell began to understand that success does not always need to be witnessed by others. There is a kind of satisfaction felt only by those who live through the process. She valued every small step that brought her to this point. She did not look back with regret. That day began like any other for Mitchell. She woke up early, got ready, and left with her mind focused on work. There was no sense that anything would change. Her schedule was full, and she intended to finish everything on time. However, one invitation she had received a few days earlier could no longer be ignored. A large family gathering she rarely attended appeared again on her calendar. Mitchell hesitated about going. She knew the atmosphere would be awkward and the conversations flat. This time, however, she decided to attend. Not to seek attention, but to show that she was not avoiding anyone. She wanted to act mature and calm. The decision was made without long discussion. She did not feel the need to ask for permission or support. That morning, Mitchell left in the car she had been using every day. She had bought it after careful consideration and detailed planning. It was not a gift, not a symbol, and not a display. She chose it for its quality, comfort, and safety. For Mitchell, it was a practical decision. She had never talked about it with her family, and she did not feel the need to. When she arrived at the venue, several family members were already there. The conversations sounded lively, though they felt distant to her. Mitchell parked the car and walked in at a normal pace. She greeted people as needed and shook a few hands. There was nothing special in her manner. She stood in a corner of the room, listened, and occasionally answered light questions. The shift began when someone asked about the vehicle she was using. The question was simple, but it drew attention. Several heads turned. The tone of the room changed. There was clear curiosity. Mitchell answered briefly, without details. She did not mention the price or her reasons. She only said that it was the car she used for work. Not long after, her parents arrived. Mitchell saw them from a distance. There was no hug or warm greeting. However, their eyes moved toward the parking area. She realized they had heard the earlier conversation. Faces that were usually neutral now showed surprise that was hard to hide. Conversations that had once been brief suddenly grew longer. Her parents began asking about her work. Their voices sounded friendlier. There were smiles she rarely saw. Questions that had never come before arrived one after another. Mitchell answered politely, still briefly, and without excess emotion. She did not feel the need to explain more. For Mitchell, the moment felt strange. Not because of the attention, but because of the reason behind it. She noticed the shift in attitude, too clear to ignore. She was not angry. She was not proud. She simply observed the change calmly. Other relatives began to approach. The conversation shifted from general topics to achievements. Mitchell maintained her boundaries. She did not ask stories. She did not subtract anything either. She answered only what was asked. No more, no less. That approach allowed her to feel in control. Inside, Mitchell felt a mix of emotions that was hard to describe. One part of her felt hurt because this attention came too late. Another part no longer needed recognition. She stood between those feelings without choosing either. She let them pass. Her partner watched from a distance. She did not intervene. She knew Mitchell could handle it on his own. A brief exchange of looks between them was enough for mutual understanding. The support was present without words. As the event continued, Mitchell realized something important. Her presence was now judged differently, not because of who she was, but because of what was visible. That awareness confirmed the understanding she had been building for a long time. Recognition often comes not from effort, but from symbols. Toward the end of the event, her parents approached again. Their tone was softer. There was an invitation to meet another time. The interest was clear. Mitchell listened without making promises. She did not refuse, but she did not agree either. She chose to keep a safe distance. When leaving the venue, Mitchell walked toward her car with the same pace she had when arriving. There was no sense of satisfaction, no sense of loss. She felt calm. She knew her life had not changed because of one afternoon. She also knew her parents' attitude might not be consistent. On the way home, Mitchell did not replay the conversations that had happened. She did not analyze every word. She chose to focus on what mattered more. She had built her life with hard work and steadiness. No single moment could erase that journey. Mitchell continued her life with the same attitude as before. She did not change to meet anyone's expectations. She remained simple, measured, and focused. She knew her value was not defined by who finally noticed, but by what she built when no one was watching. A few days after the family gathering, Mitchell began to feel its impact more clearly. Her phone, which was usually quiet, started ringing more often. Text messages came in from numbers that rarely appeared before. The tone was friendly, even warm. Mitchell read them calmly. She did not reply right away. She kept some distance so her thoughts would stay clear. Her parents reached out with simple reasons. They asked how she was doing. They asked about her work. They asked about her plans for the future. The questions sounded normal, but to Mitchell they felt unfamiliar. For years, this kind of attention had never existed. She understood that this sudden interest was not a coincidence. Mitchell eventually replied with short, polite answers. She did not want to seem cold. She also did not want to seem overly enthusiastic. She kept her tone neutral. For her, this communication was not an emotional moment, but a test of boundaries. She wanted to see how long this change in attitude would last. A few days later, her parents asked to meet. They chose a simple restaurant in the city center. Not luxurious, but not too quiet either. Mitchell agreed after a brief discussion with her partner. The decision was not driven by hope, but by a desire to close an unfinished circle. When the day of the meeting arrived, Mitchell came on time. She sat at the reserved table. When her parents arrived, the atmosphere immediately felt different. There were forced smiles, but also an effort to appear familiar. Mitchell greeted them calmly. The conversation started with light topics: the weather, the trip, daily routines. Mitchell followed the flow easily. However, she felt the direction slowly shift. The questions began to focus on her work, on her position, on achievements that had never been discussed before. Mitchell answered honestly. She did not add stories. She did not hold anything back either. She shared facts in simple language. There was no pride in her tone, no attempt to impress. She watched her parents' expressions change over time. There was admiration. There was surprise. There was also a faint sense of guilt. Her mother began speaking at greater length. She said she had not expected Mitchell to reach this point. She mentioned that they might have been too harsh in the past. The words sounded like an admission, but not quite an apology. Mitchell listened without interrupting. She did not ask for clarification. Her father remained mostly quiet. But when he spoke, his tone was softer than usual. He said he was proud. The word was simple but late. Mitchell felt that clearly. There was no emotional surge, no sense of relief. She simply registered it as a new fact. In the middle of the conversation, Mitchell realized something important. This attention appeared after visible proof. Not after years of struggle, not after sacrifice. The realization did not make her angry. She had already moved past that stage. Now, she only wanted to be honest with herself. Mitchell finally shared her thoughts calmly. She said she had never waited for recognition. She built her life because it was her choice. She did not blame anyone. However, she also did not want a relationship built only on status. The words were spoken without raising her voice. Her parents reacted differently. Her mother fell silent. Her father nodded slowly. There were no arguments, no defenses. A brief silence settled over the table. Mitchell did not feel awkward. Instead, she felt lighter after saying it. After the meeting, they parted with polite manners. No excessive hugs, no big promises. Just an agreement to stay in touch. Mitchell walked out of the restaurant with steady steps. She knew this meeting would not change the past. On the way home, Mitchell reflected briefly. She was no longer seeking emotional justice. She only wanted her life to remain whole. She had learned that not every relationship could be fully repaired. Some could only be managed with clear boundaries. Her partner listened attentively to her story. There were no long suggestions, no judgments. That presence was enough. Mitchell felt grateful for the support she had now. It was what made her strong. Mitchell continued her life at a rhythm she chose herself. She knew who she was. She knew what she had built. And that was enough. The days after the meeting at the restaurant felt calmer for Mitchell. There were no back-to-back messages or sudden calls from her parents. That situation actually brought her a sense of relief. She was able to return to her routine without unnecessary emotional distractions. Work remained her main priority, and she handled it with the same discipline as always. Mitchell realized that she was no longer waiting for changes in anyone's attitude. If communication happened, she accepted it naturally. If it did not, she did not feel a sense of loss. This perspective gave her room to breathe more freely. She no longer felt the need to prove anything. At work, Mitchell was given new responsibilities. The project she handled required precision and quick decisions. She spent long hours discussing plans with her team, setting strategies, and making sure every detail stayed on track. Her colleagues respected her calm and measured way of working. There was no drama and no exaggerated promises. The busy schedule helped Mitchell keep her distance from unproductive thoughts. She came home with a healthy kind of tiredness. At home, she enjoyed simple time with her partner. They talked about small real things, dinner, weekend plans, funny stories from work. It all felt enough. One afternoon, a message from her mother came in again. It was short and polite. Her mother informed her about a small family gathering that would be held soon. There was no pressure and no special request. Mitchell read the message several times before replying. She responded with a simple sentence, saying that she could not yet confirm her attendance. That decision was made consciously. Mitchell did not want to return to the old pattern of showing up out of guilt. She wanted to come only if she was ready. If not, she chose honesty. This attitude made her feel more respectful toward herself. A few days later, her father also reached out. The tone of his message was different from before. It was shorter and more direct. He asked how she was doing and expressed hope that Mitchell would continue to maintain the relationship. There was no discussion of achievements or status. The message felt more sincere, although Mitchell remained careful in interpreting it. Mitchell replied politely. She did not open a long conversation, but she also did not shut herself off completely. She maintained the balance she had been building. For her, a healthy relationship required clear boundaries. Amid all of this, Mitchell began to notice a change within herself. She was no longer easily shaken by other people's attitudes. She did not feel the need to explain her life choices. She knew what she was doing and why she was doing it. This confidence did not come from external recognition, but from a long process she had gone through on her own. One weekend, Mitchell and her partner decided to take a short trip out of town. The trip was simple, without complicated plans. They enjoyed the time without a packed schedule. Conversations flowed lightly. There were no heavy topics and no revisiting the past, just being present with each other. During the trip, Mitchell briefly thought about her family. Not with anger or sadness, but with a healthy distance. She realized that not every relationship needed to be close in order to function. Some only needed to be maintained so they would not cause harm. After returning from the trip, Mitchell went back to her routine with steady motivation. She completed a major project on time. Her supervisor gave clear and professional appreciation. There was no excessive praise, but the recognition felt appropriate. Mitchell valued it as part of the work process. That evening, Mitchell sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the past few months. Many things had changed, but not all of them felt dramatic. The biggest change had happened in the way she saw herself. She was no longer waiting for others to recognize her value. She realized that maturity was not about closing doors, but about choosing which ones were worth opening. She did not reject her family. She simply no longer handed over emotional control to them. Mitchell continued her life at a rhythm she set for herself. She knew this path was not always easy, but at least it was honest. She was no longer living to be seen. She was living to truly live. And that made every step feel lighter and more certain. Several weeks after things had settled into a more stable rhythm, Mitchell was once again faced with a situation that tested her new mindset. This time, it did not come through text messages or dinner invitations, but through news she had not asked for. A relative contacted her and said that her parents had been talking about her within the extended family. The tone of the story sounded mixed, somewhere between pride and surprise. Mitchell listened without making many comments. She did not feel offended, but she did not feel appreciated either. She knew this pattern well. Stories about her were now circulating because her success was clearly visible. Not because of the long journey she had taken, but because the final result was easy to recognize. She ended the call politely and continued with her activities. At work, Mitchell stayed focused. She did not allow outside stories to affect her concentration. A new project was already waiting, and her responsibilities were growing. She enjoyed the workload. Her job gave her structure and clear direction. Every decision she made had a direct impact, and she liked that challenge. One evening, her parents contacted her again. This time, they invited Mitchell to come to the family home for a small gathering. The reason was simple. They wanted to talk at length without distractions. Mitchell considered the invitation carefully. She did not immediately decline, but she did not accept right away either. After discussing it with her partner, Mitchell decided to go. The decision was not driven by obligation, but by a desire to confirm one thing. She wanted to see whether this relationship could move forward honestly, without roles and without hidden interests. The day of the meeting arrived. Mitchell came with a calm attitude. The house had not changed much. The layout was still the same. However, the atmosphere felt different. Her parents welcomed her more openly. There was no lecturing tone and no overly personal questions at the beginning. The conversation moved slowly. They talked about general things. Daily life, health, light activities. Mitchell followed the flow without pressure. She did not feel tense, and she did not feel the need to impress anyone. She was simply herself. After some time, the conversation began to touch on the past. Her mother expressed regret in clearer terms than before. She said that they had been too busy chasing their own version of success. She admitted that Mitchell often went unheard. Mitchell listened attentively. She did not interrupt or cut in. She let the words be fully spoken. When it was her turn to talk, she chose simple sentences. She said that she had made peace with many things. She had not come to make demands. She only wanted a more honest relationship. Her father then spoke. He did not use many words, but his tone was lower and more careful. He admitted that he often judged by results rather than by process. He said that he only understood that mistake now. For Mitchell, the admission did not erase the past. However, she did not reject it either. She accepted it as a small step. She did not feel the need to respond emotionally. She simply said that she appreciated the honesty. The meeting did not end with hugs or big promises. There were no dramatic agreements. Still, there was a clear shift in tone. They spoke as adults, not as parties making demands of one another. As Mitchell left the house, she felt a quiet sense of relief. Not because everything was resolved, but because she was no longer carrying the old weight. She had said what needed to be said. She had heard what needed to be heard. On the way home, Mitchell reflected briefly. She realized that reconciliation did not always mean returning to how things used to be. Sometimes, it meant building a new form that was healthier. She no longer expected this relationship to be perfect. She only hoped that it would no longer cause harm. Her partner welcomed her with a warm smile. Mitchell shared the meeting in a brief way. There was no excessive emotion in her story. She felt complete. The support she had now gave her a sense of security she had never felt before. Mitchell stepped into the next phase with a more mature attitude. She was no longer seeking validation, and she was no longer avoiding connection. She chose a healthy middle ground. She knew that her life was not defined by who eventually understood her, but by how she continued to move forward with honesty and consistency. Time moved forward without many surprises after her last meeting with her parents. Mitchell returned to the rhythm of life she knew and had chosen for herself. There were no major changes on the outside, but there was a steadier sense of calm within her. She lived each day with clear focus, without the urge to prove anything to anyone. Her relationship with her parents continued, but in a different form. Communication happened occasionally and with a more respectful tone. There were no demands and no excessive expectations. Mitchell felt that this version of the relationship was more honest. She no longer felt the need to show up to fulfill an old role she had never chosen. On the other side of her life, her partnership continued to grow in a healthy way. They built simple habits that created a sense of security. Their conversations were not filled with grand plans or empty ambition. They talked about real things they could live through together. Mitchell felt that this was what home truly meant, a place where she was accepted without conditions. At work, Mitchell reached a stable phase. She was trusted to lead a small team with clear responsibilities. She worked with a consistent and firm style. Her colleagues respected the way she made decisions calmly and without overreacting. She did not seek attention. She simply made sure that the work could be accounted for. One day, Mitchell was asked to speak at an internal company meeting. She was invited to share her career journey. She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. When she spoke, she did not present her achievements as a list of successes. She talked about the process, the failures, and decisions that were not always popular. The response she received was sincere and professional. That experience strengthened one important understanding. A person's value is not determined by who eventually recognizes it, but by how they endure when no one is watching. Mitchell felt confident in the path she had taken. She no longer compared her life to anyone else. Sometime later, she attended another small family gathering. This time, the atmosphere was more neutral. There were no excessive stares and no discussions about status. Mitchell sat, talked as needed, and left on time. She felt comfortable with that choice. She showed up without losing herself. Her parents also seemed more careful in their behavior. There was no excessive praise and no claiming credit for her success. Mitchell realized that this change might not be perfect, but it was enough to keep the relationship functioning. She no longer measured everything through old wounds. On the